Estonia is traditionally Swedish. It was mostly ruled by the Swedes, which is pretty darn close, along with Finland. And technically, on a good day from the radio tower in Tallinn, you can actually see across the bay and see Helsinki. There had been talks to join Helsinki and Tallinn into one city, and that would ease trade and different things like that, customs, bringing goods across the border. Right now, Estonia is still not quite up to what Finland is. I mean, Finland's one of the richer countries in the world. Estonia has a very interesting dynamic just because it's where it's simply placed. It's a very strategic place. It puts people closer on the Baltic Sea. That's why the Russians really like it. It puts them closer. They've had naval bases in Estonia beforehand. In Paldiski, which is just outside Tallinn, and in Haapsalu. They've had submarine bases and whatnot within the country. Estonia gained its independence in, I think, 1912. My numbers might be wrong, but they were free for a while. Russia comes in, invades, and are somewhat repelled to the point. Shortly thereafter, the Russians come in again and overpower them without firing a shot, simply on the fact of false elections and other things like that. They move in right before the beginning of World War II. You have the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which was agreed between Hitler and Stalin, granting the lands of the entire Baltic nations to Germany, or to Russia, sorry, not to Germany. Germany invades, takes those lands back. They make a push farther east, like farther and farther east. They get repelled. The Russians kind of come back, take over the country, and unfortunately, we have major deportations. Anyone that was considered an intellectual or of higher standing was pretty much picked up and shipped off to Siberia. Upwards of 20,000 people were deported. Each one of those 20,000 plus a couple other tens of thousands were replaced by ethnic Russians in what the Russians deemed Russification, and hence why you have the odd dynamic that you have in the country now, where you have probably 60 to 70% ethnic Estonians living there, with another 30 to 35% ethnic Russians living in country. So it creates a very strange dynamic, and things are getting better between them, but I know things are elevating again. I haven't been over there in a couple of years, but especially now with what's going on in the Ukraine, President Obama visited there. He was the first president in nearly 20 years to visit the country. I don't know what Putin was thinking. He kidnapped on that the same day that Obama was in country. He went over and kidnapped. I can't remember. He's a guy that goes in between countries investigating crimes. So he goes cross-border crimes. It's almost like an Interpol thing, but Interpol's more European thing, not really involved in Russia. So Estonians got their own thing. There are cities that, oddly enough, in Estonia that are only accessible by going into Russia and then coming back. There's no road that connects Estonian town to Estonian town. You actually have to go into Russia to come back into Estonia. There was a death while I was over there because the Russians were not allowing the paramedics to cross the border, to go into the border and come back. And the problem there is when the Estonians regained their independence after the breakup of the Soviet Union, Russia kept a good portion of land on the eastern border, 20, 30 miles of land that now have made things kind of awkward over there. So, but I mean, that's a quick overview of why Russia or Estonians are the way they are. The dynamic on why there's literally a hatred towards the Russians is because they don't want to be part of that. You have the Ukraine, where you have lots of people saying they want to be part of Russia, but Estonia and Estonians have no desire to be a part of any part of Russia. But you have the Russified part of the country that has those ethnic Russians that were, pretty much picked up and deported to Estonia, causing awkwardness and tension to the point where Russians have to have separate travel documents. Food over there was amazing. I miss it almost every day. the different things. Estonian food has a very, very Germanic Russian influence, so it's kind of just a meld of both those things: meat, potatoes, that sort of thing. Pelmeni, which when I was there, every apartment had a deep fryer, and we'd deep fry our pelmeni. Pelmeni is kind of like a ravioli type dish. Russians boil them. I prefer to either bake or deep fry. I just think it tastes better. And we would throw sour cream. Sour cream over there is a little different. It's a lot better. A lot of people, I wasn't a huge sour cream fan until I got over there. Dairy products are amazing. Yogurt comes in milk cartons. You can just drink it. Quite lovely. Just beware, the yogurt will help you gain weight. Love the pastries. Oh, ate way too many pastries. Blood sausage is a thing over there, more of a Christmas time thing, but I was only offered it once. I ate it. It wasn't terrible. Wasn't the worst thing I've ever eaten. Got offered several times fish straight out of the bay, so just like Baltic herring, which is not something I would typically eat on any given day. Not my high preference. I never grew accustomed to the stuff they have over there called kali, which is, and Russians kvass. It's pretty much, they take a barrel, put some rye bread in it with some water, let it sit until the yeast starts to activate with the water, becomes carbonated, then they drink it. So it's pretty much bread water. Really, really funny tasting. Some people learn to love it. I personally thought it was the strangest tasting stuff I've ever, drank. The food was amazing. The people were amazing. They would have vlevad, which is just like open-faced sandwiches, stuff like that, salads, like a herring salad or a potato salad, or boiled potatoes with sour cream and chives, like tons of stuff. Like they would just like, here's food, eat it please. And sometimes these people are super poor and you feel kind of bad taking their food, but it's 10 times worse to just not eat their food. And 90% of the time it was really good. Everyone needs a chance to eat at Old Hansa. It's a medieval restaurant in Old Town. Go there, super expensive. It will be worth the money though. Only place I've ever eaten wild boar, bear, reindeer, all that kind of fun stuff. So kind of interesting. Rose pudding. So Estonian's very, very different than almost any other language that I'd ever heard. Estonian's very similar to Finnish, which to the point where if you're hearing to an untrained ear, Finnish and Estonian sound exactly the same. Accents are a little different. When I was in Estonia, people thought I was always speaking Finnish because my accent sounded like I was Finnish. But I feel like I got a good grasp on the language while I was there. The language is different because prefixes and suffixes are added to words in order to change the meaning of a word. So if you're going to say, I'm going to go with him, which he or she, tema, gets changed. The root word will change into a different form of the word, where then you can add an ending onto the word. So temaga, so adding a ga onto the end of the root word literally will now mean with him, or with her, or with it. It is very different. It's something that's hard to get used to because that's how they form their words. They'll mesh words together, like Eba Jumala Kumardamina. They'll just throw words together, which literally means idol worship, but the way they do it is they'll just mesh the words together, which literally turns into non-God worshiping and whatnot. So they'll just mesh words together, which is, as you're starting to learn, it's harder because you don't necessarily hear it. But once you realize that the emphasis always comes on the first syllable of every word, you can start picking out where words end. You can start picking out parts of words within words, because there can be different things. And a guy actually went through, I think it was in the 1840s, he wrote up the language trying to make it more beautiful. So he added a lot of vowel sounds, which became colloquial Estonian. There's still a couple of other dialects like Võru, which are still spoken in southern Estonia. But what happens is he tried to add more vowel sounds because he thought that was a more beautiful sounding language. So there's a lot of a, u. So you got a lot of vowels in the language, which is a little different than English. And completely understanding direct objects and things like that will really, really help you understand how Estonian works. Finnish is stated as being the hardest language to learn for an English language learner in the world, and Estonian is its sister language. So it's not going to be easy. There's not as many cases, which does make it nicer. But yeah, it's going to be hard. Don't expect it to come immediately. Estonians are not like the French. They will help you with every little bit ever. And if your Estonian could be literally the worst Estonian they've ever heard, they will literally turn to you and say, the Russians have been here for 60 years and still do not speak a lick of Estonian, but you speak beautiful Estonian, even though it's horrible. So you will have the most support from every single Estonian because you are trying to learn their language, which I think touches every one of their hearts. It is beautiful. And when you finally get it, and that day that it kind of clicks in your head and everything kind of comes together, it'll be awesome. I remember the border crossing and seeing the guys with the guns and just being like, oh, this is a little intimidating. And then we got off the bus and I honestly felt like I was in a war-torn, like, Eastern Europe. It's changed. It changed in the time that I was there. So it's not like, but when I got there, there was a giant hole in the ground. All the buildings were a little bit run down. The bus station was being rebuilt and the old one was still kind of standing there. It was old, decrepit. Pretty much when you look at old pictures of Russia, that's what I was looking at. I was just like, holy cow, like this is... they were deciding to rebuild the mall in the area, and they had dug out a big hole where they were going to be putting the new mall in, but then they came across some ruins, and so some archaeological people had come in, and I didn't know that at the time, but there was just a giant hole in the ground that was just sitting there. We walk over to our apartment building, and we open the door, and we walk into the stairwell, and it's this old nasty green paint that's kind of like just flaking off the concrete walls. And we walk up a flight of stairs and we open this door that looks like a bomb shelter door. It's just like this huge thick metal door, and we walk in and it is freezing. Like the temperature has not changed from the point I got off the bus walking up the stairwell into the bedroom. Like the temperature had not changed, and I'm just like, it is still like 37 degrees in here. Like, what is going on? And I look down and the floor creaks and it's just painted plywood. And I walk in and they're like, well, your bed's right there. And I'm like, sweet. And they hand me a blanket that, I'm tall, I'm 6'4", didn't go over my entire body. And so for the next couple of days, I really, really struggled to sleep, mostly because I was just cold. I served in an old wooden part of town where most of the buildings were old wooden buildings. The people, most of them were struggling. Most of them lived in 1 2-bedroom or 1 or 2 room apartments, just floorboards, a bunch of walls, all their stuff piled up into a corner, a sink in the corner, and a bed. Never had seen poor in that manner of poor. The government's made great strides in the past couple of years to make sure that living conditions for all their people have gone up. But there's a great disparity between people with money and people with hardly anything. No, there's an element of pride with the people too. With the Russians coming in, and then the Nazis coming in, and then the Russians coming in again, trying to get rid of the Russians, finally getting rid of the Russians, and now prospering on their own. It's quite amazing. Very proud people of what they've accomplished, especially by the means they've done it. And I think that really stands testament to them, that they've gained their independence through not necessarily fighting, but standing tall and representing what they do. I mean, the singing revolution to me which is what they call them gaining their freedom. Family dynamics are a little bit weird. Guy living on one side of town with his mother, and his wife and daughter living on a completely other side of town, and they consider it normal. And it's not normal. I mean, to me,